The rain didn't fall. It assaulted the city, a relentless silver barrage that turned the world into a watercolor nightmare. Eleanor Vance's world had ended in a boardroom on the 42nd floor. Now standing on the curb outside the monolithic glass building she had once called her own. The finality of it was washed in shades of gray. Her tailored Alexander McQueen power suit, a sartorial suit of armor, was soaked through, clinging to her shivering frame like a shroud. The water plastered her dark hair to her scalp, mingling with the tears she would never allow anyone to see under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances. She had just been ousted from Vance Innovations, the tech empire her grandfather had built, in a hostile takeover so brutal it felt like a corporate execution. She fumbled with the keys to a car she now seriously doubted she still owned. The sleek black BMW i8, a symbol of her success, sat silent and unresponsive. The electronic key fob was dead as her career. The rain seeped into the very fiber of her being, a chilling metaphor for the cold dread flooding her veins. A soft, hesitant voice cut through the downpour. "Ma'am? You look like you could use a dry place." Eleanor turned. A young woman no older than 20 stood holding a large, patched-up umbrella. She had kind, anxious eyes and wore the simple, grease-stained coveralls of a mechanic from the garage next door. The girl's name, Chloe, was stitched over her heart. "My car," Eleanor managed, her voice hoarse. "It won't start. The electronics in these things hate the humidity. Let's get it into the bay. I'll take a look." Chloe's smile was a small, unexpected sunbreak in the storm. Numbly, Eleanor allowed herself to be led into the warm, cavernous space of Henderson's Auto and Restoration. The air was thick with the smells of petrol, grease and metal, a stark, honest contrast to the sterile, backstabbing atmosphere of her former office. She leaned against a workbench watching as Chloe, with a quiet competence Eleanor found both impressive and unsettling, guided the BMW inside. The garage was a sanctuary of a different life. Classic car skeletons sat beside modern hybrids, each in various states of repair, and in the center of it all was a man. He was bent over the engine of a vintage Mustang, his back to her. He moved with a quiet, unhurried precision, his hands stained with grease, speaking a language of their own. He was broad-shouldered, his dark hair peppered with silver, and when he finally turned at Chloe's call, his eyes were the color of a calm sea and they saw right through her. "Dad, this lady's car conked out in the rain," Chloe said. The mechanic, whose name tag read Elio, wiped his hands on a rag. His gaze swept over Eleanor, taking in the ruined suit, the trembling hands, the utter devastation she was failing to contain. He didn't look at her with pity, or with the avarice she was used to from men who saw her as a trophy or a rival. He looked at her with a quiet, unnerving understanding. "I'll get the diagnostic computer," Chloe offered, scurrying away. Silence fell, broken only by the drumming rain on the corrugated metal roof. Eleanor felt the walls she had spent a lifetime building begin to crumble under the weight of that silence and his calm, steady gaze. The corporate composure, the iron will that had earned her the nickname the Valkyrie on Wall Street, shattered into a million pieces. "It's not just the car," she whispered, her voice breaking. Then the dam burst, a sob raw and ugly ripped from her throat. She slumped against the workbench, her shoulders shaking. "I lost everything. My company, my seat on the board, the vote of confidence, my own colleagues. They took it all. 20 years of my life. Everything I built. Everything I am. It's gone." She cried for the long nights, the sacrificed relationships, the belief that if she just worked harder, she could honor her grandfather's legacy. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes burned. Leo didn't move. He didn't try to offer a hollow platitude or an awkward pat on the back. He simply waited, a steady rock in the torrent of her grief. When her sobs subsided into ragged, hiccuping breaths, he spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, and it carried a weight that stilled the air around them. "You still have her," he said simply. Eleanor looked up, confused, wiping her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of grease on her cheek. She followed his gaze to where Chloe was humming softly, connecting cables to her car's computer. The girl was a stranger. What did she have to do with anything? "What?" Eleanor croaked. "Your daughter," Leo said, his eyes softening as he watched Chloe. "You still have her." The words hung in the oily air. Nonsensical. A mistake. A confusion. A moment of profound miscommunication in her shattered state. I don't have a daughter, Eleanor said, her brow furrowing in confusion and a flicker of annoyance. Was this man simple? Couldn't he see she was in the midst of a total collapse? Leo's eyes finally left Chloe and returned to Eleanor. The look in them was no longer just understanding. It was deep, ancient, and filled with a pain that mirrored her own, yet ran infinitely deeper. He took a slow step forward, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Eleanor, he said, and the way he said her name, not Ms. Vance, but Eleanor, with a familiarity that stole her breath, sent a jolt of primal recognition through her. Look at her. His voice was a whisper, but it was a command. Drawn by a force she couldn't comprehend, Eleanor turned her head. She really looked at Chloe, at the way a stray strand of dark hair fell across her forehead exactly like Eleanor's own, at the shape of her eyes, a lighter shade than Leo's, but with the same intense focus, at the determined set of her jaw, a carbon copy of the one Eleanor saw in the mirror every morning for 20 years. Her breath hitched. The pieces, jagged and impossible, began to click into a picture that shattered her reality more completely than any boardroom coup ever could. Memories, long buried and sanitized, flooded back. A summer fling. A boy named Leo Henderson, her first and only true love before ambition and family expectation pulled her away to college and her destiny. A frantic, terrified phone call. A decision made in a sterile clinic. A secret she had locked away in the deepest vault of her soul. A choice she had convinced herself was necessary. No, she breathed, the word a ghost of a sound. Her eyes wide with dawning, horrific comprehension snapped back to Leo. That's not possible. I terminated. Leo's face was a mask of quiet, enduring sorrow. The clinic called me when you didn't show up for the follow-up. You'd already left for Stanford. I went to the appointment you'd scheduled. They said you'd canceled. I spent a month trying to find you, Eleanor. Your father told me to never contact you again. He said it was for the best. He paused, the memory a fresh wound even after all these years. You were 6 weeks pregnant. You didn't know, and you never came back to find out. The garage spun. The smell of oil became the smell of antiseptic from a memory she'd suppressed. The sound of the rain became the sound of her own frantic heartbeat from 2 decades past. She had been so sure of her path, so sure she had closed that door forever. And now, standing 10 feet away, humming as she worked, was the living, breathing consequence of that choice. The daughter she never knew she had. The one thing her rivals couldn't take from her, because she had already given her away without ever knowing. Leo's simple, heartbreaking statement echoed in the silence he had carved out of her world. You still have her. The world had not just tilted. It had shattered, and Eleanor was free-falling through the jagged pieces. The polished marble floors of her penthouse, the glass walls of her office, the very bedrock of her identity, all of it dissolved into the grimy, oil-stained concrete of Leo Henderson's garage. She couldn't look away from Chloe. Now that the truth had been unleashed, it was blindingly obvious. The resemblance wasn't just passing, it was a haunting echo. She saw her own mother's smile on the girl's lips. She saw Leo's stubborn determination in the set of her shoulders. She saw a lifetime of lost moments in every graceful movement of her hands. How? The word was a ragged tear in the fabric of the humid garage air. She turned her wild, desperate gaze back to Leo. How did you... My father. He said he handled it. He said it was taken care of. Leo's calm facade finally showed a crack. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He handled it all right. He paid off the clinic administrator to tell you the procedure was completed. He paid them to tell me you'd changed your mind and gone through with it at a different facility. It was only when I saw his obituary in the paper 3 years ago that I finally tracked down that administrator. She was dying. The guilt had eaten at her. She told me the truth. The final piece of the twisted puzzle slammed into place. Her father, the man who had groomed her for leadership, who had preached about the weight of the Vance name, who had looked her in the eye and told her she'd made the strong choice. He had orchestrated this. He had stolen this from her. The betrayal was so vast, so profound. It felt like a physical void opening inside her chest, colder and emptier than the loss of her company ever could. He lied to us, she whispered, her voice trembling with a new, more personal kind of devastation. He lied to me. To give you the future he wanted for you, Leo said, his tone not forgiving but factual. The weight of 2 decades of single parenthood was in that statement. And I got the one he didn't. His eyes drifted back to Chloe, and the love in them was so pure, so fierce it was like a physical blow to Eleanor. It was a love she had never allowed herself to feel. A love she had been taught was a liability. "Dad, the computer's being weird. Can you take a look?" Chloe called out, oblivious to the earthquake she was standing at the epicenter of. "Be right there, sweetheart," Leo replied, his voice shifting effortlessly into a gentle, paternal tone. He looked back at Eleanor, his eyes holding hers. "She's applying to MIT in the fall. Wants to be an engineer. Top of her class." There was no accusation in his voice, only a father's pride. But every word was a shard of glass in Eleanor's heart. MIT. She had donated a new wing to MIT last year. She could have been walking past her own daughter on that campus and never known. She watched as Leo walked over to Chloe, his large, grease-stained hand resting gently on her shoulder as he peered at the screen. She saw the easy, comfortable way Chloe leaned into his touch. She saw a history of bedtime stories, skinned knees, science fair projects, and quiet dinners in that simple gesture. A whole life. A life she had missed. The corporate titan, the woman who had stared down billionaires and broken conglomerates, felt smaller and more insignificant than she ever had in her life. She had been chasing a legacy made of glass and steel, while her real legacy was standing right here in coveralls, her hands smudged with engine grease. The storm of her tears had passed, leaving a bleak, arid landscape of regret. She had been crying for a lost company, a lost title. Now she had no tears left for the lost 20 years. The pain was too deep, too absolute. After a few minutes, Chloe smiled. "All fixed. Just a glitch. Rebooted the system." She handed the keys back to Eleanor. "You're all set, Ms. Vance," Eleanor said, the name feeling alien on her tongue. Eleanor Vance. She saw no flicker of recognition in Chloe's eyes. Just polite professional courtesy. Why would there be? To this beautiful, vibrant young woman, she was just a stranded, crying stranger in an expensive suit. "Well, Miss Vance, you're good to go." Chloe gave her that sunny smile again before heading to the back office, leaving Eleanor alone with Leo in the cavernous space. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. The crisis was over. The car was fixed. But nothing would ever be right again. Eleanor took the keys, her fingers brushing against Leo's. A spark, not of romance, but of a shared catastrophic history, passed between them. "What do I do?" she asked him, her voice a broken whisper. It was the most helpless question she had ever uttered. Leo studied her face, seeing the raw, gutted woman beneath the ruined CEO exterior. "That's not for me to say, Eleanor. She doesn't know. I made a choice too, to protect her, to give her a normal life." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "You need to decide what kind of storm you want to bring into her life now. The truth or silence." It was an impossible choice, to claim a daughter who didn't know she existed, to upend her stable world with a truth that was born of betrayal and loss, or to walk away again and live with a ghost that was now painfully, beautifully real. She walked numbly to her car, the purr of its engine a mockery of the turmoil inside her. She paused at the driver's side door, looking back at Leo, a solitary figure in his kingdom of broken things made whole. "I'm sorry, Leo," she said, the words utterly inadequate. "For everything." He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Eleanor slid into the leather seat, the door closing with a soft, final thud. She watched through the rain-streaked windshield as Leo turned and walked towards the small office, where she could see Chloe laughing at something on a phone. A perfect, contained world, a world she had no right to. She started the car and pulled out of the garage, the wipers pushing aside the last of the rain. She drove aimlessly for an hour, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. The hollow ache of losing her company was now filled with the crushing, suffocating weight of this new reality. Finally, she pulled over on a quiet overlook above the city. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky littered with stars. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her purse, calls from lawyers, from worried assistants, from reporters. She ignored them all. She had lost everything. Her company, her title, her father's twisted version of a legacy. But Leo was right. She hadn't lost everything. She had gained a daughter who didn't know her. A daughter who called another woman mom? The thought was a fresh dagger. A daughter who saw her as a customer. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Eleanor picked up her phone. The screen glowed in the dark car. With trembling fingers, she opened a new browser tab. She didn't search for stock prices or business news. She typed 2 words into the search bar, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The search results loaded. She clicked the first link. The screen filled with a donation page, a list of sponsors, and there at the very top was the answer to a question she hadn't even known to ask. The final, unforgettable twist of the knife. The page was for the upcoming MIT Engineering Fair. The headline sponsor, the name emblazoned across the top in a sleek modern font, was Vance Innovations. And right below it, as a future Innovator Scholarship patron, was the name Chloe Henderson. Her daughter was already in her orbit. Her company, the very entity that had been ripped from her, was sponsoring the future of the child she had just discovered. The 2 halves of her shattered life were already touching in the world, connected by fate in a way that was both cruel and beautiful. Eleanor stared at the screen, a single hot tear tracing a path through the grime and dried salt on her cheek. It was no longer a question of if. It was a question of when. And as she looked out at the city she no longer ruled, Eleanor Vance, the dethroned queen, began to plot her most important takeover yet. Not of a company, but of a chance at a truth she had been denied for 20 years. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than ever.